The players have just finished a major milestone in your campaign. With loot in hand and downtimes on the horizon, they want to return to their home city to sell what they don't need and make sure the home front is secure and safe. When they return, do they go to their houses? A shared hideout or castle? Maybe their stronghold is inside an extra-dimensional space. Wherever the player characters travel, there is likely a place that they will return to stash their excess items, conduct business, or simply a hearth to decorate and put their feet up to relax. Having a consistent place for the characters to return to can bring depth and investment to your game. We'll be discussing the merits and mechanics of having a personal structure the players can return to tonight on Playing God. I'm Nick Logie, and with me is Xander. Are you sure you want to do that, Nolan?
Hey, man.
Let's jump right in with why these structures should exist in the first place. So why should they, Xander?
Well, in a Dungeons & Dragons, or World of Darkness, or whatever campaign that you're going to run, a structure and a place is just as important as a player character. When you describe the dank and darkness of a cave, you describe its smell, how it sounds, are there monsters inside? A place is just as important to the DM and to telling the story as every other thing, every NPC walking around. Each building is its own separate NPC. It has a story, it has a reason for being there. PC-owned structures are exactly the same way. They are there to create a sense of depth and a sense of belonging that sometimes player characters don't run into, especially if they're the murder hobo type.
I like to think of this from like the Frodo standpoint from Lord of the Rings. Even though we as an audience don't give a fuck about his house, he as a character, and thus your PCs, would give a lot of care about that house. When he comes home at the end of the third movie, and he's like, he finds that, like, the book and everything in the chest, and you can see all the stuff on, like, the shelves and everything, then he customized all of that. And if your player is the one playing Frodo and they customized all that, that's a good experience for everyone. It offloads certain creative aspects of the situation from you as a GM. It also creates a shitload of player investment because they want to see what they can do with the place. They want to come back to it. They want to engage with maybe something you don't get to engage with in anything other than like a video game or a tabletop.
One of the things that I like to do that I've done with a couple of my different games is provide a place that the PCs, like, they've cleared out a dungeon and now they can suddenly use this dungeon for their own purposes because it's been cleared of all the monsters. They know where all the traps are, and this would be a great place to stash their loot and all of those things. But allowing players to take control of real spaces within your game setting definitely helps to provide a sense of grounding, and it also helps to provide a place in which they can return to on a regular basis where they know the score. While they're out adventuring, the woods could be a terrifying place if there's giant monsters and goblins and things running around trying to kill them constantly. But once they lock that door and lower the drawbridge to go in and then lock themselves in, they're safe, they're secure, they know these things. And it also provides you as a GM with an interesting little tidbit that you can use to your advantage. Say they come home and everything is gone. Now the players are invested in figuring out who the hell looted their freaking castle. So it adds just a lot of depth.
What you could do as well is if they're already home, they've come back from a nice long adventure, and they're kicking their feet up to hang out for like a week or whatever as they contemplate downtimes. And then somebody assaults their homestead. Now you get a cool dynamic where the players know the home turf. So it's like they're on the other end of the dungeon invasion, where they know how to operate within these walls, and now your enemies, your NPCs or your monsters, they don't. So you get this. You can have like a cool siege situation, or have them straight up infiltrate like their castle or their house. Maybe why whoever shows up isn't even there for the PCs. Maybe they're there for some friend of theirs, like an NPC who happens to live on site or is
Mhm.
like one of the workers there or something, and that gives you more stuff to interact with. And once the players see that someone's encroaching on their turf, you don't have to convince them to do anything about it. They're gonna go
They'll do
right
something
for it.
about it. Oh yeah, and you can even draw this as far out as a player character picked up a cool little dagger that it has some kind of special properties to it, and it was once owned by someone who was quite fearsome, but they happened to lose it, and then they hear through the grapevine that this guy who's been running around adventuring happened to find his knife. Well, talking him out of it's probably not going to work, so he sends an assassin to go and kill the player character, or a rogue just to go and steal the thing.
Or maybe he
So,
does try talking it out with them, and
yeah,
maybe you gain an ally or a cool arch villain or something from the interaction.
yep. So, PC owned structures are there's something that can take your game to another level of both complexity and creativity that you might otherwise not have access to. The bar that the player characters constantly visit, like a really good example is the fish-based pun bar that we always visited in the Latier world.
The drowning
We
tuna.
would the drowning tuna. We would go back there constantly after we were done with missions and stuff. Now our characters are far by and large beyond that place, but if we find ourselves back in that area again, we will probably go back there because it's a familiar location that the PCs are aware of. But the difference is that's a DM created and GM managed place
That was actually
where
something
the
I
atmosphere
created
is.
just for an adventure, and it turned into something that they returned to afterwards. I was expecting them to do that. It was supposed to be kind of a throwaway place, but since they decided to do it, I ended up fleshing it out a bit and made it a bit cooler and have more depth.
Yeah,
But
and
that's something that I created. I put this stuff on the map. You can also like that. A good question to ask if you're considering putting something like this in is if you're the one who wants to give them the thing or have the thing in the world, or if it's something that they create or they bring to the world. And there's a
yeah.
bunch of different ways to do this. One of my favorite ways is actually in the deck of many things. You draw. I can't remember what the card is, but you draw the card, and it says something along the lines of "You're like the owner of a castle," and it's like, all right, cool, it's a castle, but the castle is filled with really hard monsters. So you could, so like your first example, they could straight up just go get that property land, clear it out, and then they have a home.
Yep. Or another good example is if your characters are doing uh, a downtime action in fifth edition, they can roll on a table for the carousing roll, and one of those things is you become a noble with a title and land.
That
Like
was
you
yeah,
gain
that's
those
happened.
things. That's totally cool as hell.
Yeah, the game can
Uh,
totally generate that. But if you're trying to generate it purposefully instead of just you roll on a table and some shit
Randomly.
happens, then that's something to consider whether you want to give them something or that they should create it. Now,
Yeah.
I've had this happen both ways in my games, and some of my games don't have these structures at all. It kind of just depends on what the theme and like the level of adventuring you're trying to do is.
Hmm.
So we got to compare real quick between Dungeons and Dragons, your traditional tabletop fantasy, and something that I'm super familiar with, and Xander is too, which is Shadowrun. They
Yeah.
each of these could have their own structures, but it is much more likely for this to be the case in Shadowrun, where there are built-in rules for how to handle that kind of thing. It even part of the game is paying rent, so it's
Yeah.
kind of assumed that you need to have some place to go. Whereas D&D, there are options for lifestyles, and like if you live in like a big house or whatever, you have to pay however much gold it is a month. But generally, I don't think I've ever seen anyone. I don't. Yeah, I've never seen anyone use those rules. I haven't even used
Yeah.
those rules.
Now, when you're running a fantasy game, typically, you want your players to go on a continent-spanning adventure into lands unknown and things like that, because that's what
Yeah,
fantasy
they're
games are for.
adventures, and they're adventures. That's what they want to do. That's why they became adventures, because it's not about staying at home. Because anybody could play Joe Farmer, just hanging out tending crops, and like some goblins show up or whatever. But
Yeah,
it's a different thing entirely to be like, we are leaving our home city to cross this continent to try to save this country or world or universe.
yeah,
And
like whatever your plot happens to be.
yeah, so
Um,
you're probably not going to return to that structure anytime soon. So it might not even be
no.
worth it to have it, other than be like, yeah, I have a house, and then that's pretty much it. No point in getting too much in depth with it.
Now, the way that I've found where player character owned structures, uh, they come into play in any campaign when the scope is very finely tuned. The entire campaign takes place in one large metropolitan area. It is very likely that each of the player characters, if not collectively, then individually, will have a homestead that they call their own. But the larger your scope gets, when it's spanning countries and continents and the entire planet, sometimes even extraplanetary bodies, like with Nick's game, which took a fucking hard left on La La Land. Like, jeez.
It was a hard up
Uh,
into space.
yeah, it was a hard up into space for Latier, which we were not expecting. Um, but the larger your scope, uh, the less likely that you'll have PC-owned structures. That said, if your player characters enjoy doing that kind of thing, and this is something that you can ask them previously to the game actually starting, is if they want to have structures, they can have multiples. So they have a farmstead out in, this small town where they grew up that used to be their father's. But when they went to the big city to go and deal with something, they also gained a large house that was gifted to them by the Earl of that location. And then as they continued on, and you can discern the rest. The
It's like
concept of
Skyrim, where every town you go to, you become the Jarl and get a house or like a room or something.
yeah, like it's like know that I'm a thing. Fantasy games do offer the opportunity for that, and because player owned structures can have so much meaning, there's a left and right that you should balance as a GM. If you want to give them the option of a location, then having your player characters build the house, like say they own the land and all of the equipment and things to build their house, but it just hasn't been built yet. It gives the player characters a sense of, I created this, I made this, I put this into the world myself. And that will help create some kind of attachment to that location. Adversely, DM created structures. For example, the castle that they have to rid the goblins from, and
Or
what
you
have
could
you.
use that castle that you gave to us in the game with the Tabaxi.
Yep. What I had done for this particular instance, one of the factions that existed within the world that I had created was a college of lore and magic, and this college had several locations dotted throughout the world with extra dimensional portals between each one of them, so that people learning to become a bard, there was a college of the bard, then there was a college of the wizard, and da da da. Well, at one point, one of the locations, namely the library for this whole collegiate kind of group, was burned to the ground. Now, in exchange for their services, the college actually gifted them the structure, because the structure was still sound, but most of the books and everything had burned up.
Then they didn't have to clean
Uh,
it up anymore. That was the
and
big
they didn't
thing.
have to clean it up anymore, so they just gave it to the player characters. And what I did was I actually created a map and gave each of them their own room that they could decorate however they wanted with things that they had gathered throughout the world.
And
And
also to know, even though the structure itself was set up by Xander, once it came to starting to customize stuff, that was all up to the players. Like which room we even
Yes.
took was our choice. What we put in those rooms was our choice. What I mean, shit. There was an entire I did an entire quest that everybody else oh shit, I can't remember what they wanted.
Yeah, you just
I
wanted a
just
rug.
pointed to the fucking spider silk rug that I was standing on. I was like, "This is fancy. I want that." And and the guy was like,
And he
okay."
okay, you could have the rug then. And that offers that kind of style offers a lot of flexibility for your players, but it adds a purpose for the location being there. And since the players had already been there previously and they knew what it was before, and they knew what it meant to the people that were giving it to them, it created a dynamic of pride because they were the ones who had helped this place kind of gain that location. Adversely, this
Well,
doesn't have to be just a single structure. There was
no.
another campaign that I ran where, in exchange for helping an ancient dragon, they were gifted with an island floating in the sky that had multiple buildings on it where they could create their own village and recruit NPCs to come and run the shops and tend to the livestock and all of that. And I gave them the option of making their own micro community. So how big or how small you go with it is completely up to you. But when it's all said and done, the customization and who they want to put where and how should be up to the players. Otherwise, it sort of feels like you walked into the game, the DM
Yeah,
gave you a village,
you're playing
and
Animal Crossing where the guy's like,
yeah,
"Hey, here's a house that now you owe me $50,000," and you're like,
yeah,
"Wait,
no,
hold on, man. I don't know if I agreed to that."
yeah,
But it's
you don't want to do that. That's good for a video game, not
not
so good
not so good
for
for tabletop. But something that it does share similarity with the video game with is the sense of progression for things that aren't just strictly good character bonuses and stuff like that. So even with your like small knickknack items, trinkets, or like that freaking silk rug, then those in and of itself, like when the players collect those, it's not just like it's another thing to shove in the bag of holding that we want to sell later. It's like, I actually really like this thing. Let's put it in my bar that I own. Like maybe this mobile or whatever that spins and has like a bunch of like, I don't know, like dragon scales attached to it that shimmer in the light. Like normally it's just like, yeah, let's sell that, whatever. But if you have a place to put it and it could be visible again, then the players
Mhm.
feel like they have more control over the world. It's more fun, and later on, if when you're describing the scene or you're letting them describe the scene, especially like if you have some games have rotating players, then when a new character, a new player shows up to this place and they're like, "Whoa, what's that cool thing?" There's a whole story behind it that you're not just
Mhm.
relaying out of play. It's like they sidle up to on a bar stool and talk to you, who because you're the bartender, and you're like, "Yeah, this is back during the war. I managed to get that out of a lair of a dragon."
Yeah. Like having a solid location for your player characters to coming back to is definitely a boon, and it creates another layer of depth to your game. But along with that layer of depth comes, how do they manage and maintain this place? Uh, this is one of those things that, like in Shadowrun, there's a monthly cost for maintaining your apartment or your home or whatever.
Yeah,
But
and you also like buy services. Like if you have
mhm,
like a fucking special matrix connections to certain grids, or maybe you play Miracle Shooter. That's just all that is just a role play upkeep thing.
yep,
I think half my characters have played Miracle Shooter because it's awesome. Uh,
hell yeah.
and then there's and like Dock Wagon as well. Like they have the numbers in the book already to tell you how much stuff costs and everything, and like when certain things tick. And it's a
Mhm.
lot easier to do in a more uh, modern style game because you have the conveniences that you normally wouldn't be able to get in a fantasy universe.
In something like Dungeons and Dragons, there are some places in like the Dungeon Master's Guide and I believe even in the Player's Handbook for certain editions where it has how much a banquet would cost and how much a night in an inn would cost and stuff like that. But there isn't necessarily a monthly upkeep because your player characters would have to, on a regular basis, hire, manage, and or fire, if necessary, NPCs from this location. Because they're adventurers, they spend a lot of time away from home. They would have to have a gardener to keep things nice and tidy, someone to manage their stables, someone to clean the place while they're not there, and all of these servants would be live-in, and all of their wages and the supplies that they would need would have to come out of the player character's coffers. This provides you as a DM with something your players can invest their money in and not just carry around 400,000 gold that they got from the Dragon's Lair with nothing to spend it on because they already have plus 35 everything. So
Ooh, plus
if you
35,
have
damn.
it's an exaggeration, but you know,
It's a
if
powerful
given
weapon.
the choice between, you know, you have 50,000 gold on your person, it only costs you 25 for the weapon that you've been, you know, grinding away for, and you finally have now you have 30,000 gold to do whatever with, and you've already got the thing that you wanted as a player. So having a structure where they can pay servants and buy expensive, you know, rugs and place all of their knickknacks from and the collectibles that they got from their adventures when they retire is something that you can have as a steady, slow stream of money going away from the players in such a way that they feel like they're making a permanent investment in their character's future. Because a player character, if played properly, let's keep that in mind, will want to think about, well, if I don't die, what am I going to do when I get too old to adventure? Because eventually, even if you're an elf, you get too old to adventure, and you kind of just want to settle down. And, you know, if you want to have a family as a character, then you're going to have a place to put your family. You know, you're gonna have
So
a
depending
means
on
by which to grow your wealth.
so depending on the level of detail you want to go down with it, is this is something you want to bring up to the players before you implement such a thing. Unless
Absolutely.
unless you don't require a lot of maintenance. That's why I wanted to say this, because if if you are hiring servants and you do want to keep track of the money like that, maybe even just one player doesn't want to do that because they're playing an adventure. They don't care about this. All other four players and the GM want to have one of these structures. It should be perfectly acceptable for somebody who doesn't want to engage with this thing, other than just like normal role play, to have the option to opt out of engaging with it.
Oh,
Because
absolutely.
it's like the freaking stock market that everybody wants me to do in Shadowrun. Like, I don't want to do that because it's too much
A
work.
lot of work.
Um, but there's always like maybe one, two players even that usually want to see something like that. I might put in like a small thing for them to interact with, but I'm not gonna make full blown mechanics for the stock market. Similarly, if another player at the table, like while the other two guys are interacting with the stock market thing, then maybe they have zero interest in this. Maybe they don't care about trying to increase their wealth. Maybe that's not even like neither a player nor character motivation. Maybe they're playing a impoverished monk or something, or paladin who gives all of their money away. Suddenly, if this character is forced to maintain a structure like that without knowing before making the character that this is going to be something that they'd have to care about, then suddenly you just have a character that isn't interacting with anything and probably isn't having any fun.
Yeah. Uh, the best way to handle these kinds of structures in that kind of scenario would be to provide it as a place for them to go back to, but not run significant amounts of plot out of it unless all of the characters are invested.
So
So,
here's a lot of
yeah,
examples from Shadowrun, because
yeah,
so in one game we had no less, and this is with all the players there were three businesses, two hideouts, like two houses, three apartments. The Metal Gear Rex, which I count that as a
It's a
structure
whole
because it's
other
big.
thing. That's definitely a structure.
They had to hide that. But that's all from just a group of 5 players. And the way I like to do this is I generally have a hands-off kind of thing with these structures. I will put all sorts of shit in my games, like cool buildings and places and everything like that. But I am open to the possibility of at any time a player could like look at how much Nuyen they have and be like, damn, I could buy a house now. And then I'll go through the house building with them. Because that is a fun thing to do. But if nobody wants to do that, nobody comes to me about that, I'm not going to push it on them. Sometimes I don't even make it a suggestion. Because there's already a lot to keep track of. And if that's not something that even crossed their mind, then maybe they don't care enough to even bother thinking about it. So we should refocus on the stuff that everybody truly cares about instead of trying to shoehorn in one of these structures. Yeah. A quick example is about the Badger Hole / Dragon's Den, because depending on what part of the what time frame in the campaign you showed up, then it was the same place, but wildly different. What started as an NPC-owned shithole in the wall place that was just a bar, that was called the Badger Hole, had a sparking sign, it was a big fire hazard, was eventually purchased by a PC who was interested in operating the business. And what he did, instead of leaving it as a hole-in-the-wall place, he turned it into the place to be. It was suddenly like where normally it was just a place for criminals and Shadowrunners to meet to, gather and get intel and, talk to each other. It was now a place where rich people would show up to be like, yes, I would like a drink here. Or even weird creatures, like maybe in the middle of the night, a vampire shows up, and this guy, like the character's name was The Truth, and he was a smart character. He prepared for everything. So maybe like if a vampire showed up in the middle of the night for this bar, he could straight up have like a blood bag as a drink. The Badger Hole would not have been able to provide that. The Badger Hole provided free swill that was slightly radioactive.
And eventually might give you magic powers. Or might kill you. It just depends.
But when the NPC who owned the place, Willie Stacks, when he sold it, he didn't want the responsibility of having to do all that anymore, because he was like middle-aged, and he had done shadow running, and he'd been working with the PCs for a while, and he's like, I don't want all this responsibility anymore. And that's when the Truth offered to buy it off of him. And after he did, Willie Stacks still worked at the bar because he enjoyed doing that, but now he didn't have to care about all the business side of everything.
Yep.
And so certain NPCs can come with locations. If for some reason you decided to drop a shitload of gold to buy the drowning tuna, although the name can change. We gotta how about desert crab? It's got to be some kind of paradox. If they had bought that, then they would have had like the NPCs that were there. Some of them didn't have names, like the random bartenders and waitresses, but like the owner did. And maybe he becomes a key NPC or has some kind of loose end that he needs to tie up. And then acquiring that building is now part of the campaign.
Yeah, like you have to pay off the loan to these shady loan sharks that he'd gotten just to keep the place open. Now you've bought the place for what it's worth, but you've also got to take care of this loan shark.
You guys kind of did that when you spoke to the blacksmith guy really early on in Legends of Latir, like game 4 out of 112 or whatever we're at right now.
We're at 113.
Oh, geez, we're farther along.
It's crazy.
But so when you're thinking of these places, another thing you want to ask yourself is, do the NPCs come with the establishment, or is this something that maybe the players create? Not full-on character sheets, but like they have a name, what he does, what he looks like, what race, if that's relevant to the setting, such as Dungeons and Dragons, which is important. Uh,
Or
and
Shadowrun, which is also
was yeah,
important.
that's also important. I guess it is important in most games, isn't it?
Yeah, it really is.
Well, all right. So, but you have like some brief notes, and you're just like, "Hey, can this guy be the bartender?" The example I'm thinking of is when Jesse made the entire 30-person crew for the Pathfinder version of the Ivory Crow, which he played the whole crew. He had an actual player character, but every time he needed something when they were on the boat, he would just call somebody over, and I'd be like, whatever, fine, whoever this is exists, and they're just gonna do whatever. They're not leaving with you from the boat to go do adventuring, so it doesn't. I don't need stats; they don't really matter. But if you need some random guy to swab the deck, he's there. You can make him up. I don't care.
Yeah. This also gives the opportunity that if they don't want to create the NPCs that are going to be running the place, the opportunity to recruit them. Say, for example, they're bumbling their way through a small town, and or let's say even a big town. It doesn't really matter.
That is a
And
town.
as it is a town, it is a location in X, YZ at
Wait, it doesn't have to be a town,
3
Xander.
o'clock. Oh, okay, fine.
It could be
Anyway,
a
uh,
cave, or it could be a
it,
space station, or it could be a boat in the middle of the ocean. I was just throwing more
anyway,
examples.
so say the player characters are walking down the street, and one of the player characters gets bumped into by some random street urchin. Perception check dictates that, hey, this kid just jacked your freaking coin purse. So the player characters go running after the kid and they're like, hey, don't do that. That's bad. But they're like, you know what? I do feel kind of sorry for you. So here's a few silver and a gold piece. Don't show nobody that gold piece. Uh, try to take care of yourself, kid. And they leave, and then they come back much, much later, and they find out that that little kid had grown up into a fairly squirrely teenager, and years had passed and what have you. And he was doing okay. He was in school and what have you, but he was struggling to figure out what he was going to do with his life. But he happened to have just a passion for working with animals, and he was volunteering at a local veterinary's clinic. And your player characters had literally just purchased a large farmstead just outside of town. That NPC that you introduced as a small pickpocket a long time ago can be recruited to manage the stables for this location, and he would get a good paycheck, and he's with people that he knows who helped set him on the right path. And recruiting NPCs from your adventures to be the people that manage your estate or manage the farm that you have or run the details of your castle or however you want to run it.
From a more
Hell,
human
even
standpoint, it also
astronauts.
just let you see which NPCs the characters want to interact with more. Because if they were like basically want to recruit somebody that you didn't think was even important, then if the I mean the players clearly had an interest in interacting with whoever this is,
Oh,
so it's a good
absolutely.
opportunity to bring them on board and continue those interactions.
And doing that means that your players have affected your world so intrinsically and so in so thoroughly that a player character, a non-player character that you introduced many months, many sessions previously, has now jumped to the front of the spotlight. And if this particular character happens to be someone that they could take under their wing and teach, and if, say, the player character dies and now they have a new player character who has a rich backstory already that they're
Good old
all
legacy
aware of,
characters.
legacy characters are great to pull from locations like this because you already know who it is, you know generally what they're capable of, and it's not going to be a shoehorn to try and introduce a new character into your game if they want to run a legacy character,
Because they're already there.
because they're already there and they're already fleshed out. They're already a real entity within your game.
It
and
also
having
helps
a
you as a
ready
GM
location.
because
Oh yeah.
it makes one thing particularly much easier. If you need to deliver some plot or quest hook or MacGuffin and you can't think of a reasonable way to do it, why not have one of the NPCs that they're already hanging out with happen to know about that? Maybe the wizard that decided that he's done wandering around the jungles all the time wanted to hang out in a city, and he's just like, you know what, I'll take care of your castle for a while. I got unseen servants. This will be easy. And you come back and you want to put them on a new quest. So maybe this wizard's like, you know, back when I was an adventurer, I heard of this rumor of something 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 going on here, and you guys might want to look into that. So you have an organic way of bringing the next plot hook into the game without having to rely on cliched tropes all the time.
Yep. And it also offers you the opportunity as a GM to sit down across from your players. And if you have dropped little hints that they might know about this kind of thing previously, then it gives the wait, you've been planning this the whole time moment? And that is one of the greatest feelings
That's one
as
of
a
my favorite
GM,
moments.
and one of the most frustrating as a player character. You're like, wait, how did I not notice this? It's a really great moment, and it's an offer for great plot twists and things to happen that your players are not expecting. A great example of a not expecting was an NPC that Nick introduced to our player characters as someone we need to go find.
Huh?
And because we needed to go find this individual, we had no idea who she was, what she was about. She had some cool magical stuff and a weird magical kind of buddy that hung out with her.
Who are you talking
And
about?
it turns out that it wasn't all magical, it was all fucking mechanical. And she happened to be from a totally different a totally different place than we even expected her to be from. And then she's the one that introduces us to the fact that we're going to fucking space.
Oh, you're talking about
Like
Loria and Moat. Okay.
Loria. And then it's like, wait. And then he's like, if you recall back to this particular session, you will realize that the giant metal structure that had fallen down in the middle of the desert that you were running down of to try and escape looks awkwardly a lot like one of these fucking spaceships. No.
That was one of my favorite things.
Nick,
I've been waiting
no.
so long to have that chain of events set off because I knew that once I gave you the first thing, you would make all the other connections for throughout the whole campaign and all the space shit I threw in. It was so satisfying to hear the like everybody think through everything. It was like, wait, no, fuck, that happened. How did we miss that? It's like rewatching a movie that has a lot of hidden shit in it. Kind of like a not a Shyamalan movie because those just have twists coming out of nowhere, but like a good movie with a twist where you go back and watch and you're like, well, shit, they did set that up the whole time, didn't they?
Yep. And those moments are some of the best moments that you can have as a GM. They're really fun and they're really great for player characters because you get that hype, like that suddenly feel is just so it's so intense and it's so rewarding both as players and as a game master. And those opportunities will present themselves if you have those kinds of locations already planned in and put into the works.
Will's done that to me a couple times where we get to like
Oh,
the end of a campaign and there's like this big reveal and then you think about it for a second and you're like, God damn it.
you son of a bitch. So, because player character owned locations is definitely something that happens on a regular basis, um, there is also the opportunity for player characters to own businesses. The Truth owned the Dragon's Den. He completely refurbished it, made it from the Badger Hole into the Dragon's Den.
Full renovation.
Full renovation. It made it beautiful, complete with a freaking water speed guarding the door.
He also added that secret like meeting room underground too. That was a
Yeah, that
completely
was
new thing.
pretty dope. But because you want to get into some specifics where businesses and things like that happen to crop up.
Yeah, if
Um,
businesses show up, like actual businesses show up in my game, then I have a little more hands-on approach. You don't get to just hand wave certain aspects.
yeah.
Um,
Uh,
if the mechanics of the game, and this is what I'll say before I let you continue, Xander, is if the mechanics are so not conducive to allowing you to have a business, then I would just say not worry about it at all. But if the mechanics can at least be bent towards that, and that is something that you and your players want to do, then that's another layer of fun to add.
yeah. Um, when you are confronted with player character owned businesses, there's a choice that you have to make right up front. Is that does this business operate for a significant purpose that we will see front of screen? Like the Badger Hole, or sorry, the Dragon's Den is a great example of that. We were there all the time. That was our meeting place. It maintained its purpose throughout our game.
There was
Uh,
also the oh shit, what was the gang that Jesse was a part of?
Cutters,
The Cutters. The Cutters
because I was
also
also a part of the
had
Cutters.
like the warehouse hideout thing, and that was a fully customized place. Well, I did a lot of that, but you guys returned to there a lot of times, and you knew where you were going. I didn't even have to narrate the place anymore. You just said, "Oh, I want to go to
Yep.
this room."
Yeah, we already knew where we were going. Even when we were going to talk to evil Kanye West with a sword. Uh, uh, God, I can't remember his name.
It's Slicer X,
Slicer X. That's right.
the evil Kanye West, or eviler Kanye West, depending on how you view him.
Yeah. So a business can be a great way for player characters to bring in a little extra gold. And if you're running a grittier campaign where you don't find a giant hoard of gold accompanying a dragon or what have you, and a lot of money is not something you come across regularly, then having a small business that they operate to keep a steady influx of income every time they visit this location is a way for your characters to interact with the economy of the world and make small changes and tweaks. And it also imposes the opportunity for a little bit of risk. And that risk can be something as small as, do we put a second oven into this bakery that we bought and are now running as the owners of? They're obviously absentees. The D&D game is not taking place from behind the counter of a bakery. But as the
Oh,
owners,
dude, I
they're
just thought,
entitled to the
okay,
profits.
all right, so this is a really stupid idea, but when you said it doesn't take place behind the bakery, I was just thinking of inserting, so you know the whole trope with, there's rats in the basement? Well, what if
Oh,
you took that, but added a mega dungeon? Like, yeah, there are rats in the basement. All right, we cleaned them out. Wait, what's that door over there? I don't remember that being here. And then they open it up, and it's a staircase down. It's like, what? And then next thing you know, there's a 20 level dungeon right under this bakery.
well, shit. Actually, I think I did something similar to that with the sewers
I mean,
in
then
one of my games.
because then the bakery's front and center, and it's also a place they can return to every time they're done figuring out what the fuck's in the dungeon.
Yeah, yeah, that's fair. So the question comes down to, um, say for example, your player characters are informed by the manager of the bakery that they own that there have been a couple of times throughout the day, especially during the heavy areas, i.e., the morning and right after things start to close down for the day, that they just don't have enough product on the shelves to fulfill the demand, and they've had to turn people away or ask them to wait 20 minutes while things bake. Could you spend 200 gold to have a new oven put in next to the old one and have the old one refurbished into a larger capacity? This would give the opportunity for more income, but that investment could backfire in that it doesn't get used and just kind of sits there, uh, or there could be something wrong with it and the product doesn't taste quite right, and by the time the player characters come back along, the business could be in the tanks, and they're in the middle of an adventure, and a guy on a horseback runs up and says, "Excuse me, sir, are you blur, give name? Yes, I have an urgent message to you from the city.
Your eyes
Take this."
only.
And they read it, and suddenly they have, in the middle of this adventure that they're going on, they now have a letter from the manager of their bakery saying, we are going downhill quickly. I don't know what to do. You have to come back now or the business will. All of the
or
money that they've invested is gone.
the sheriff of Nottingham comes knocking at your door and just yells, "Taxes!"
Taxes!
There, you got plot.
It offers the opportunity to create a little bit of risk that isn't necessarily it's a risk to livelihood. You know, they've put a lot of time, they've put a lot of thought, they've put a lot of effort and their in-play resources into this location, and now that's in jeopardy. So fixing that, you know, could be a really big deal to this player, but not a big deal to the other players, which could create a little bit of, but we need to take on the blah blah. But if we wait like 2 weeks, what's he gonna do? Like, you know, it's like we gotta go back right now because we're really close. So it creates another layer of suspense and tension that you can introduce to your game, that when that tension is released and the player characters feel like they've done something worthwhile, you know, they went back, they saved their business, and as a collective, you know, they asked the 7-foot tall freaking barbarian who's never touched a freaking pan of loaves in his life to stand in front of the cash register and
intimidate people out of money.
Freaking scones.
Buy the scone, or else.
Okay, so it offers a kind of a little bit of slapstick comedy into the game, as now your player characters who are normally running around killing monsters for a living and taking their stuff now have to emergency run a bakery because all of the employees have quit and the manager's at his wit's end. He's got bald spots from tearing his hair, and your characters have to save this place now, and it adds a whole other level that you just can't get without
right that. With that level, if as you've all heard just from that example, there was a lot of complexity to that. There was a lot of nuance to how Xander handles this kind of thing, and it might not be a level of complexity you want to bring to your game. I personally wouldn't do something like that, of that level. Nor, honestly, Xander, I would be one of the players who would want to opt out of that whole thing. Because running a business isn't so fun for me as in terms of, like, fantasy stuff. There's enough work to go on in the real world that I don't really want to pay attention to that kind of thing. But
yeah,
that is definitely a great example that shows a lot of thought that's been put into even what I don't know. Was that an on the fly example?
That was totally on the fly.
Yeah, so there's a lot of complexity in just that. You could take some of those ideas, maybe not like the whole encompassing thing, unless you'd like to, and maybe narrow down to have the scope focus more on what your particular game is about. Maybe in the aspect of purchasing more stuff for the place. That might be a thing you have hard numbers for, like how much gold you have, where it's going to go in the building, and all that. But maybe you don't need to extrapolate on the potential consequences of that. Maybe by hiring another employee, as long as your party fund doesn't hit 0, then maybe you don't have to worry about that. Maybe the manager doesn't tear his hair out. Because in your scope of your game, if you're trying to save the world, one middle manager who's having a frustrating day at work doesn't really compare to the horde of ogres that are about to overrun Thravendale or something.
Yeah.
You kind of got to focus both on the out-of-play narrative and the in-play focus on that event, and then they can come back and handle the other event later. So you may want to also consider maybe like removing time limitations. Because if they're going to be out adventuring for an arbitrarily like 3 months is what you think that they're going to take on an out of play level when you plan this, when all's said and done, if they get back and you had all these arbitrary timers on things and either they didn't know about it or they couldn't find out about it somehow, that's actually a bigger issue if they couldn't find out about it, because then they get back and they're like, what the hell happened? And it's not a fun what the hell happened. It's not they come back and it's just like, this place is on fire, there's the bad guy, let's fight. It's more like, do we really have to do these chores?
Yeah. And that kind of uh that kind of thing is definitely like it follows your story beats, and either should happen at the beginning, like they're gathering intel and information regarding the big bad guy that
I
they're
say
trying to
just be
track down,
very.
but they're
I just
currently
straight
spinning their
up.
wheels.
Yeah, I just say straight up, be just straightforward with them. Like Xander, when we did the downtimes for Legends of Latir, I said you
Yeah.
have 8 months. Whatever you do in that 8 months is up to you, but you have only a limited amount of time to do this. I
Yes.
also made it clear when Aeonok showed up, when the demons appeared, that it wasn't a hard timer because you don't want to put people in a crunch in a game, but well, unless it's like narratively suspenseful. But it
Yeah.
wasn't as relevant. So I made it clear that there was basically the end of the world timer, but the way I portrayed how it was progressing was through narrative aspects of the story. So as the demons spread
Yes.
out from their portal, when the Laterian scouts and everybody informed the players of like of how far they had spread and what towns, what even cities got either destroyed or captured by these demons. It was very obvious that as this became a bigger problem, they had to hurry it up in order to find the real MacGuffins in order to solve the problem. And so
Yeah.
if you could do it narratively, that feels more fluid and more fun, I think. But if you like charts, if you like calendars, that's great. In
Yeah.
Shadowrun,
Totally.
we
Totally do it.
we legit played on a week by week basis, and each week a week would pass in play. And if certain events happened to line up with how the real world calendar did, like when Jesse ran the Super Bowl of Seahawks versus whoever it was, um, and we had to interact with that on the actual day that in the future that matchup would take place, then we had a whole new aspect of that problem in like riots in the streets and like people fighting over football and shit like that because it's a huge deal in Seattle.
Yeah.
We weren't dealing with that plot, but that plot was happening and we had to get around it. Like the
Yep.
police were out in force, but we were trying to do crime. But also there were so many people out in force that we could do anonymous crime, and we did.
Of course you did.
Of course we did. I can't remember exactly
Uh,
what happened in that session. It was more memorable to me that there were like so many people packing the streets. We couldn't rely on the Matrix navigation because it would put us in traffic. So we had to like manually navigate through streets, and we had the actual map of Seattle and everything up. It was pretty
oh
tight.
wow, that's awesome.
We're taking this
Yeah.
street
So
down this street. We're gonna take a right here, and then we're gonna be the place we want.
yeah, so whether you decide to make it front of screen, if that's your deal, or a downtime only action, these things can offer some money, some minor problems, some fun slapstick style opportunities for you to introduce into your game. But that brings up the question of when should your players visit these places? Is it a base of operations, hometown, you know,
Yeah, how
what it
frequently
is?
should they do it?
When?
Xander brought up the aspect of front facing versus downtime. If you are only using the structure for downtimes, then you want to have it to be more infrequent. If you want it front facing, then it needs to be an intrinsic part of the story in some way.
Absolutely. Now, a good example of that, say you're running a Shadowrun game and you're doing like Nick and Jesse and I did for our Shadowrun games, that where time took place IRL, time also took place in game, then downtimes are any day that you're not gathered for that mission. Time constraints wiggling because, you know, it could be you meet on a Monday for the game, but the actual mission took place on the Tuesday following, but you're still playing on Monday.
Yeah.
But that leaves Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, and Sunday for your player characters to manage this business with their downtimes. Like, okay, so what do you do with your downtimes? I'll play Miracle Shooter the whole time, and I'm gonna try for the top score. Yeah, burn everything to the. Or they say, well, I am going to be crunching the numbers. It's getting to be close to tax season. I'm going to make sure that the taxes that I have to pay for this business are paid in on time, and I'm going to be managing the business. Okay, because you are actively participating with your quote unquote downtime business, you receive a revenue check for 20,000 new yen. Congratulations, you
Shadowrun's
just made
actually
a
a
bunch of
really good
money.
Shadowrun's actually a really good system for business stuff because
Oh yeah,
there's a straight up negative quality called day job, and that can both explain why your character might not be on every Shadowrun because they got to work, or
yeah,
that's the explanation for why you're making profits in your business.
yep. Uh, so when you want to move time along and have business management be something that they can interact with, should usually be a dedicated downtime action, unless it's going to be super front of screen. The difference is,
Which in D&D, if you're gonna have it that front of screen, maybe have that as the tavern that everybody meets up at instead of like some
oh
random
yes,
thing that you like they just show up in the shady corner of a tavern like they always do. If they're the ones who either own or just come to this tavern, then you could just start the game there. Like the game opens up with like the door jingling open as like a haggard adventurer stumbles in to interrupt your drinks.
hmm um, adversely, when your characters don't have a business, but they do have something like a farmstead or a home base or a castle or a large skyscraper piercing the skyline of downtown Seattle. That location that's important to the players is something that they're going to want to visit, and that desire to visit it, especially if they're adventurers and they're gone for many months at a time or even year, off doing the things that they need to do as an adventure, they're gonna want to be like, all right, I am so done. I'm gonna go back to my feather mattress and lay down in front of the fireplace with the dog that I found. That is now with the puppy that I found and rescued from the horde of goblins in Act One, who is now a fully grown dog and is running around the house. It's like, hey boy, how's it going? They're gonna want to visit this place, and so
It gives
the
a
way
little
you
character, a little more
construct
character
that,
to the character.
yes, when you construct your story beats for how you run your game, if you have it in an act or chapters or just episode by episode by episode, you want the players to have a significant amount of in play and out of play time where they can unwind, stop being adventurers for a little bit, maybe do a shopping montage, where they go and get clothing that is, relevant to the place that they're visiting, or, however you
Yeah, that's more of a
want to run that.
downtime thing though, and less to do about the structure itself. So what when what should a GM allow? Like, where's the line? Is what I'm getting at because for me, there's a lot of free form in how you handle one of these things, um,
hmm
and but there are limitations that I'll have. Like there are certain aspects that you can't just hand wave. Like if you want to get something cool and fancy to hang up on the wall, you got to pay for that. But
Oh yeah.
but if you want to do something like some crazy major overhaul, like uh, I want to somehow take over the buildings that are attached to this one, then that might just be outside of the scope of what you are willing to run as a GM. Because if the player expands outside of what kind of fits in your narrative, then you're gonna have to draw a line. You're gonna have to say no at some point. Um,
Yeah.
but I try to avoid that as much as possible. Xander, you got any examples of maybe when a player tried to go too far? Usually, a player goes too far in my
Uh,
game when they ask for frickin' stock market.
actually, I do have a moment that it sticks out to me rather significantly. In one of the first campaigns that I had ran, there was a location that the player characters had came across, and there was a little bit of political problems with the place because this particular small town happened to fall directly on the border between one nation and another nation who were currently, they're not at war, but they're like one short fuck you away from being at full scale murder war. So this location was definitely a place that both sides wanted to have the loyalty of. And so the player characters went there to try and, garner the place that they had came from. Say, hey, come over to this side. It's a lot more freeing. You won't have to deal with as much. Da, 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 da. And if war breaks out, this would be the best outpost for soldiers to come through, and you have lots of open space and da da da. So when they were there, there was a carousing that had happened, and one of the things that had happened, one of the player characters ended up in a very serious romantic relationship with a maid at the inn that they were staying at. And because of that, the player character had garnered a relationship out of the deal and was constantly sending money and resources back to help the village, and he built his fiance a house and all these
Oh, I
things.
was wondering
But
where that was going.
the problem that came up every time they had a lull in the story beats, like a major, like not even a major arc, a minor arc would come, and they'd be like, okay, I'm like, all right, guys, so where do you want to go next? The first thing out of the guy's mouth was, well, I want to go back to this village. You're on the other side of the world right now. And it was a constant, I want to go back, I want to do this, 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 and it always hinged around that location. My way of handling that was to say to the player look, the way this is going to go is that when you guys get the opportunity to travel great distances very quickly, like teleportation,
Yeah, then you could go
or a
nuts with
flying
it.
ship, then you can go back fairly frequently. But as of right now, your ability to return to this place has to happen when the arc happens to fall to a lull when you're in that location. And that was like, it irritated me enough that it was like, all right, I don't want to have to deal
I
with
mean,
this.
all right. So at that point, I would have actually had to tell I would have told the player, like, not like in a harsh way or like I'm trying to kick him out of the game, but if that's the thing, if that's the sole thing that they're interested in, then this isn't the right game for them, really.
Yeah.
That's just that sounds like a retirement thing that the character does. Honestly,
Yeah.
like I go home, done.
Now the problem that I ran into additionally with it was that because of this carousing role, the player character leaned into it. And I am all for leaning into some story beats. Go for it, go nuts, but have a little bit of respect for the other players, because the other three players in the campaign, they wanted nothing to do with this narrative at all.
Yeah, see,
But they were
exactly. That's
constantly being drugged directly back to this place, and so I adopted that a regular returning to a location would happen. But say you just beat the villain of Act 1 and you're about to have some downtime. That is when you return to this location, and we can do a couple of sessions where you're in that location,
yeah,
you're
in and
doing some of
around
the smaller
there,
stuff,
and yeah, taking care of
and
business,
then the next adventure would come to pass.
and then you leave again.
And then you leave again, then you come back, and then you leave again, and you come back, much like the tide.
This,
But the tide can't come in.
what is it? What's it
Every
called?
10 minutes.
Compartmentalized storytelling.
Compartmentalized. Yes. So when I feel like players should visit these places, if it's not a micro scale game like in Shadowrun, everything takes place, or at least for us, in Seattle most of the time. We were constantly at the Dragon's Den. that going back there was a every game kind of thing. But Legends of Latier, I can't just say, all right, I want to go back to the Parafith for a couple of days.
I mean, now you can.
Because,
You have access to teleport and spaceships and bullshit.
well, yes, we can now. But when we were traversing through the Underdark,
Or when you're going
and
through
we
the
were
desert, you couldn't do
walking
that.
through the desert, we couldn't just do that. We
You had to
couldn't
do
just turn
some.
around, head back for a couple
You had to
of days.
actually take like a couple games to set up a way just to send like refugees back, which was pretty cool.
Yeah. So, when you should visit these places should be when the player characters have a need to go back, or, and this is something that Nick has implemented and that I find really interesting, is that on a case-by-case basis, if you're running a game that's seriously, like, you're digging your heels down into the plot and you're trekking through a long road, and you've gone 20, 30, 40 games,
Or 113 as we did, then.
where there is nothing, no reprieve from the story and from the hard trek, then Nick actually gave us the opportunity for a day one to go back to Moonlight Harbor, where Jess's character Mara is from. She got to see her mom. We got to stay at the inn. We got a nice bed for a night.
You went
do a little bit of
shopping.
shopping.
You cheesed the silver alchemical thing and sold that guy way more stuff than he should have been able to buy.
way more stuff. But
they returned to a city that was important to them.
Yes. Returning to a location that is important to the player characters can happen at any time as long as the means are there. It's not too frequent. And if it feels like, the players have been grinding so long that they're just like, ugh, all right, look, can we just have a day, man? Like, we got to buy some shit. We're running out of supplies. We've got money, but it's no good here. It's times like that where returning to familiar locations, returning to a business if your character owns them, returning to a large structure that your player characters have either built or acquired throughout the story, and those moments are really important to both the players and to the GM, because the GM gets a little bit of help in creating some of the narrative, but also the GM gets the overwhelming amount of satisfaction to know that his player characters are invested with something that either he created or that they created. And that investment into the story is one of the best things that you can have. That's what you're shooting for in any role-playing game, is you want your players to be 100% invested in what happens to both them, but everybody else too.
But now we want to hear what you think. Do you give your players customizable places to return to? Do they run their own in-play businesses, or simply have a hub to return to between quests? Let us know, and if you like our content, please don't hesitate to power attack that subscribe button. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time on Playing God.
Later, man.